I'm Ryan, along with Julie in the back. We're the co-founders of Needed, and we're really excited to have you all here tonight for this incredible panel. And I think at the core, we are a nutrition company. You'll find our omega-3 powder both on your seats and then in some chai lattes on the back, which is the core thing we produce. But I think really realize our main focus is how do we nourish women that are kind of before, during, and after birth, and realizing that just nutrition alone is really just one part of what it really means to be nourished. So at the same time, also focus on these conversations to give facts and community around other things that you need to know. And on your chair, you will also find a little flyer that we'll be referring to tonight with some relevant information on the topic. And then there will also be, you'll find a link to a blog post with further details and have it there too. But with that, really want to just turn it over to Ivy, who's she, and then these amazing three are the real reason that we're here tonight.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for being here this evening. I'm Ivy Joeva. I've served as a doula since 2009, and I specialize in supporting families throughout the childbearing year, so the preconception journey through preparing for birth and recovering after delivery. And this conversation that we're about to have with these incredible experts is really the culmination of a long-term dream of mine since I became a doula. I remember, I'll just share with you a brief personal story. My very first birth I attended was, like so many of my clients, a mom who really wanted an unmedicated birth, but the setting she chose and the provider she chose was really in opposition to that goal. And as a new doula, I had no idea how the degree to which the cards were stacked against her. And so going into that experience and watching her labor and watching the pressures that were on her in terms of the interventions that were not only suggested to her, but really forcefully encouraged, really played on a lot of her fears. And it ended up in a cesarean birth against her wishes, really against her true wishes. And so going through that experience with her really impacted me as a doula. I almost quit at that time. And it was the community of birth workers that gave me the strength to continue and to work with clients as I do today. And so one of the reasons we're here is so that women don't have to have that experience, that you're able to have the kind of birth that you're wanting. And what we're discovering in this country now with the really abominable statistics around maternity care is that this importance of choice is not only for the experience of mothers, it's also a health and safety issue. We're seeing some of the worst maternal death rates in the developed world, the worst actually, as well as the worst neonatal death rates. And so it's a shame that it's not enough. It should be just enough. A mother's experience of giving birth, but it's really time for all of us to wake up and do what's necessary to allow choice to be in the hands of mothers. So with that, we will dive right in. I want to just give a little bit of history because a lot of us aren't familiar with the concept of what informed choice is, where does this even come from, and how does it apply to the labor context. And I'm sure Dr. Julie here will illuminate this much further. But I just want to share a quote from a 1914 case from the Court of Appeals in New York, that every human being of adult years and sound mind has a right to determine what shall be done with his, and I am adding her or her own body, and a surgeon who performs an operation without his patient's consent commits an assault for which he is liable in damages. And then later in California in 1972, the Supreme Court further said a physician is required to disclose all information relevant to a meaningful decision process. And the appellate court went on to say that this must include disclosing all material information necessary to the decision to undergo the procedure, including a reasonable explanation of the procedure, its likelihood of success, the risk involved in accepting or rejecting the proposed procedure, and any other information a skilled practitioner in good standing would disclose to the patient under the same or similar circumstances. So it sounds pretty basic, but as a birth attendant, I see all the time, this is absolutely not being done. It's almost never being done. And so we're going to look at, what is the law? What is the written law? So the difference between that and what's actually happening, and then why this disparity between the written law and what's actually happening, and then how can we as birth workers help shift this, and what can you as parents and parents-to-be, what do you need to know to really have your rights intact and have the kind of experience you're desiring. So with that, I would love you all to introduce yourselves, because these women have too many credentials for me to list.
Hi, I'm Dr. Suzanne Gilbert. I'm an obstetrician and gynecologist, and I've been in practice for 20 years. I'm also board certified in integrative and holistic medicine, and I'm also a clinical Ayurvedic specialist. So I have background in herbalism and Ayurvedic medicine, meditation, yoga. I do a lot of educating and speaking, and I feel very strongly about educating and empowering all of us, because everybody involved in this is a human. So I really want everybody to just take that in for a moment. Everybody involved in the birthing room, whether it's your tub or it's an operating room, everybody in there is a human. And I've been in awesome situations, watching people breathe their baby down, and I've been in situations that are real sticky and it's not clear what to do. But every single one of those situations, I was a person. And I think that's probably why I'm here. Because I think I'm kind of known for just being a person. Sometimes I'm a person that maybe I don't want to be around. There.
Okay, so I have no letters in front of my name. I would say I wasn't an expert at all until about 2 years ago. I'm a mom, first and foremost, and I had my daughter. And when I had my daughter, I switched from one kind of care to another care because I wasn't being listened to. And so I changed from one care provider to another care provider, which I was able to do through multitude of privilege, but also because I'm British, which sounds really weird because my country is about saving money, and they will save money any way possible. They will tell you you don't need something until you absolutely need it because the government's paying for it. So our system is kind of the reverse system of the US system. So I came in with very little fear, stiff upper lip, stern midwife, and so me switching to midwife care pretty late in my birth scenario didn't seem scary. It didn't seem like a weird thing to do. My mom didn't think I'd lost my mind and eaten too much quinoa, which happened to a lot of my friends with their parents. And I had a really great birth experience, which I want to say, and I thought was important to share. At the same time, I had other friends whose care providers didn't listen to them. They ended up in situations where they weren't happy, and in one case, they almost died through not being listened to effectively. And so I kind of started to unpack. I've been a journalist. I was a fashion editor for 10 years. This is not my world at all. And I was like, was I just a unicorn? Was this really special, or was this all these different privileges and this upbringing and this cultural history that I had that enabled me to have this kind of birth and didn't allow my friends to have this kind of birth? So I started unpacking it. And that's when I found the racial disparities in this country, and I was like, okay, this is really messed up. And I wouldn't stop talking about it. And I had my newborn, and my husband was like, can you just chill out? And I was like, yeah. He was like, fine, make a movie. So he was a producer, so that's his solution for everything. He was like, hey, make a movie. So I did, and we just finished editing. It's wide-ranging from, I thought it was just going to start out as like, this is what happens when you go into the hospital, and these are all the things you should know, to taking in personhood and our rights to be legal persons, to taking in racism, which is a big part of the puzzle, unfortunately, in this country. Capitalism, why we have the medical system we have, why doctors are being forced to operate in ways that they're not happy with, why they're overworked and understaffed. Trying to look at this whole big picture holistically. And so I now know a lot about birth. I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I've talked to many very, very informed people, from OBs to midwives to parents who've had great experience and parents who've had terrible experiences, and that's me.
I'm Julie Cantor. I teach at the UCLA School of Law, a course I created on reproductive rights, medical ethics, and the law. It was a class I created when I was in medical school at Yale, and I thought it was needed, in a word. And my interest in this issue really predates even that. When I was in law school, I remember needing to study for finals, and I was bored, so I decided to just watch TV. And I had like 3 channels at the time because that was what you could get on the, like, that's what my TV could pick up because I didn't have cable. And one of the channels was the Learning Channel, and the Learning Channel had this series called a baby story. And so I just started watching a baby story after a baby story. It was like this baby story marathon because it was competing with like studying for the torts exam. So, and the thing that struck me was how different the births were based on the place and the provider. Like, one woman would be squatting and the midwife would be behind her, whereas another woman would be on her back with her legs up in stirrups with surgical draping. And I just thought that was sort of different. And, it struck me as something that was a little bit curious, so to speak. And after law school, I went to medical school, and I went over to the midwifery school for a lecture by this incredible midwife named Saraswati Vedam. And she was talking about her work. And I was so struck by how that model of birth was so unique to the Yale School of Nursing and the midwifery program, and it made no sense to me that this wasn't just standardized across the whole birthing system. I really didn't understand it because it's not like, there's a way where you get a cavity filled, or there's a standard of care to do a hip replacement. I didn't understand why it wasn't standardized. And so that sparked my curiosity, and that's where I started to really dive into the subject and become, kind of frustrated by it and advocate for change in a lot of different ways.
So what is actually the law around informed consent specifically in the United States?
Well, the law of informed consent, I think it's a good idea just to turn to our cards because I think there are some issues here. So this is a general where it says California law ensures your right to informed consent. These ideas are general to the law, sort of generally in the United States. There may be some specific things if you're in a lawsuit in a particular area. For example, if you're on a jury and you're asked to evaluate a medical malpractice case, for example, or you're bringing a lawsuit, there's a majority rule where the standard is what would the reasonable patient want to know. There's another rule that it's what would the reasonable doctor have said. There's a combination, like we were talking about in California, and then there's a very small, they call them a minority rule, a very small number of jurisdictions, which I mean like a couple of states, where it's what would that patient have wanted to know. And you can kind of critique that by like, well, people aren't, omniscient. How do you know what that patient would have wanted to know? It might not be the best rule. So there are kind of different rules there, but generally speaking, if you look at what the American Medical Association says in terms of ethics and in terms of the general law, it is really to understand a few things. One, what is the treatment that's being proposed? What's the nature of it? What are the risks? What are the benefits? And what are the alternatives, including doing nothing? And this is not particular to birth. This is if you have cancer and you're getting a cancer treatment, you have the right to refuse care, but you need to understand what your risks are. And then the material, quote unquote, risks, and that's an area where people could argue about, well, what's material? Is a 1 in a million risk material? Is a 1 in 100 risk material? And that's where we get into those jurisdictions, like what that person would have wanted to know. So you have to have really a conversation with whoever is your clinician. And, I think it's always good if you're in a situation where you can come to the table having done some of your own homework, like I'd like to know more about that, or what are the risks of this. So I think if you look there, those are really like the core issues there, that you have a right to make decisions about your body. You have, and doctors have ethical training, they have ethical obligations. One of those obligations is to respect patients' autonomy. Another one is to do no harm. They call that non-maleficence. Another one is the ethical duty of beneficence, to act well, to act in your patient's best interest. And the fourth one is justice, to treat similarly situated people similarly. And so those are the kinds of things that, at least in the abstract or in the ideal, those are the things that animate informed consent. And the legal rules, while they may vary a little bit in terms of what the law looks like, it should be what this person wants to know. The idea is that you should be able to know enough to make decisions about your own body.
One of the things you had said is there needs to be a presentation of alternatives. So how is an alternative being presented if the physician himself isn't trained?
I'm not sure what you mean by not trained.
So one of the
And not that I don't want you to answer it, because I'm sure there's a legal answer that's
not at all.
equally valid but different.
Yeah. So one of the quotes is that certified nurse midwives, not physicians, seem to practice more in line with the evidence. So what we're seeing in obstetric care in the United States today is that a lot of the standard practices that are just done de rigueur are actually not evidence-based. It's more of a culture.
I think it depends on where you're practicing. So, and I also think this is really, really, really important. Informed consent is a very long process. It is not, and it can't really be something that's occurring only in labor. All of us in this room are aware of the fact that you really don't know what's going to happen, which is where a lot of the conflict starts to arise, right? Because if I'm coming from a training system that's very hierarchical, very patriarchal, and we have a person who is in labor, who is altered, okay, which we need to honor. That's part of the process, is a natural child, physiologically you are altered. This is not the time for a long discussion about informed consent. I mean, obviously, if something's happening, there needs to be a conversation. But do you guys understand what I'm saying? Like, the informed consent process, the educational process needs to be happening well in advance, which is why it is so important that people who are going to be involved in a pregnancy, whether they are the person who's going to be pregnant, the support person, the filmmaker, the other humans that are taking care of that person once they're in the process, that conversation has to be a long-term conversation. So if you're lucky enough, if you're privileged, and you don't have to be rich, by the way, you need to have insurance, and you need to be educated and sophisticated. I have a lot of patients that you guys wouldn't be like, none of my patients look like you. Okay, but they figured out how to work the system to get to the Beverly Hills doctor. So they're really good advocates for themselves. So obviously those people are in a different position. The problem is a lot of people are not having the opportunity to have an ongoing conversation. And I think that, from that side, is a huge issue. And then I think, like I said, the baked in inequities and just deeply, what's the word I'm looking for? Imbalanced perspectives that those of us who are devoted, I've devoted my life to this. But still, there are inequities and things that have been baked into my process and my training that make it really hard to pull away from that and then have the conversation. The only way I think to have a really safe, healthy birth is if somebody is able to trust their team enough to surrender.
Well, and that also brings up the right to change your mind, which is also a right. And so
that's part of it.
Yeah, and so that kind of leads me to Paula's story, which you changed care providers at 33 weeks pregnant.
Yeah.
So you went from seeing a doctor.
I went from seeing a doctor in a hospital. Again, no issue with I'm just saying again with no issues with doctors, but she wanted to induce because she was not going to be in town when my baby was due, but I wanted to try for an unmedicated birth.
Which happens all the time.
I was
this is not unique. Yeah.
Well, at least she was honest about it. I'm sorry, I'm just going to say, because there are so many people that would have bullshitted you. Sorry.
Yeah, and given another reason.
Your baby's too big or whatever other excuse.
Yeah, crazy. What is that?
No,
people do it.
Yeah.
All the time.
All the time.
So I...
It's a mess. I'm not saying it's not a hot mess.
Horrible.
I mean, if any of my friends tell me that's what my doctor said, I was like, oh.
Did you deliver in Manhattan by any chance?
No, I delivered in LA, actually.
Because I have friends in New York too.
Oh, New
who are
York's
like,
crazy.
well, if you want you have to, like my friend had all her babies induced because she wanted to have the baby on the Tuesday with her doctor. I was like, okay, whatever.
And that's also
but at least
a choice.
It was a conversation.
And that's
it was a
also
choice.
a choice.
She had a choice.
And that's part of what the film's about is
is maybe you really want to have that OB, because actually your chances, even though you're going to be induced, is you're less likely to have a C-section because you trust that doctor and you've had that experience with that doctor and you feel safe with them. Like that's a decision. That's not a decision I wanted to make. I was lucky my best friend was a doula and my doula, and she knew a midwife who would somehow take me into a birth center at 33 weeks. And I had precipitous labor. I had a really fast birth. Precipitous labor is when your waters break and then your baby just is like, hey, I'm here. So I thought I was being really wimpy because I said to my husband, I was like, so my waters just broke, no contractions, nothing. And I was like, and now it feels really, really bad. And he was like, well, I think it's going to take some time. I was like, it's really bad. And we got from our house to the birth center, and my daughter was born 2 hours later. And I hummed.
Was her first baby?
Yeah. And I
That
hummed.
does not happen very often.
And I hummed because I was doing I did hypnobirth, so I hummed and I was really quiet, and apparently the only time I spoke in my entire labor was to ask if everyone was okay and if anyone was hungry. Which my husband said was the most English thing ever. And so I had this really amazing experience, and I'm not saying everyone's going to have like a 300-mile-an-hour birth, which is also quite terrifying, by the way, but that's what happened to me. But I felt supported, I felt safe, I felt like I'd been able to make the choices to have a care provider who was listening to me, that I'd been able to have conversations about the type of birth I wanted to have, and it worked out. At the same time, when I left, I spoke to many, many, many friends who, firstly, my birth story was crazy, because they were like, how the hell did your baby come out that fast? But also, they were like, oh, well, this happened, and I don't know if I wanted to make that choice, or I didn't want to make that choice. And as a journalist, I started to wonder why that had happened. Like, was it the unicorn thing? Was it my care provider? Was it that I was in California? Because also when you talk about the informed consent things, you can discuss laws a little bit more, but the feticide laws or the personhood laws in certain states switch that conversation and take the rights away from the mother, even when she's trying to choose. You know, in California, we're very lucky, and there's places in the South, particularly, unfortunately, where you're not so lucky, and your voice is minimized again and again and again.
And your care providers are subjected
to that same thing, exactly. And so then how do they operate within this structure of, you know, where they're both demonized for making certain decisions, which means no one's able to practice informed consent. So it's a really complicated issue. You know, it's not, oh, well, this is going to work out for me because of this, or this is going to work out for me because of that. And then on the other side of things, I've had friends where their births didn't pan out the way they planned to, but they had a care provider who really listened to them. One friend who really didn't want a C-section, and her OB knew it, and as she went in to have the C-section, because it was the only option, he held her and was like, you're going to be okay, I know this is really hard for you, but this is the right thing to do, you're doing the right thing. And she came out the other side and she was like, I did the right thing, I felt listened to, I felt cared for. And she was like, it wasn't the dream, but it wasn't terrible either. And she's fine now, the baby's fine, and it was, all in all, it was a positive experience. And I think, really, to me, that's the heart of it, is feeling heard enough that whatever happens, you're going to end up coming out the other side.
It's an interesting time culturally to be doing this, to be hitting 24 years and to be in my early 50s and to be watching what's happening and have been a part of these conversations for a very long time, which is really an honor. Some of it's been hard, but it's been an honor. And to really have some of my own realizations. I had a brunch with my best friend today. My best friend since I'm 4. And she, we started talking about the OB who delivered my older one, my son, and her kids. And I was an OB resident at Cedars-Sinai in the 90s. Okay, so just so you know how much it has changed there, because it is I think, a very friendly place to have whatever kind of birth you want or need at this point. But when I was there, it was really like super old school. We had and still have one of the highest volumes in west of the Mississippi, and so that's part of it's an academic center. It's super busy. and that creates a certain kind of environment.
Do you guys know that we call it the baby factory?
Yeah. Yeah, so for better, of course. Anyways, I mean, there's like 8,000 births a year there. It's a lot. So when somebody would come in, these were like the pioneer women, you know, like they come in with a doula and a birth plan, and the mumbling in the nurse's station was like, sign her up for a C-section. That's literally how it was. I kid you not. That is what was going on in the 90s. So the fact that it has shifted so radically, we have peanuts, we have aromatherapy, it's like amazing. Like, it's really a real paradigm shift. That was a very long, arduous effort on the part of people really, the nursing staff mostly, to be perfectly honest. So that's where I came in. But here I am, and I get pregnant like in 4 seconds as an intern. So that was fun. And I decided, I had a friend who was a Bradley instructor. I don't know if you guys know, Brad was very old school, but you know, was one of the original natural childbirth support methods. So I took a Bradley class. So here I am, an OB resident taking it. I was like on the down low, and I got what I could from it. And my former husband and I at the time were like, got it, we're doing this. And I came in labor and was young, healthy, low risk, and my OB literally disrespected every single thing. And I didn't quite know what was going on until, like I knew, but I think part of me was like traumatized, so I didn't want to know. And I had, by the way, I had a 12-hour labor, you know, very kind of crazy. Baby came out great, he's fine, he'll be 22 next month. All good. It was still one of the 2 best days of my life. Okay, it wasn't a horrible experience, but in retrospect, I've been completely undermined. And a very good friend of mine who made sort of the groundbreaking film 15 years ago kept bugging me and saying, you haven't watched the film, you haven't watched the film, you haven't watched the film. And I was with her and she was shoved it in my purse. And I went home. My son was now 12, and my husband and I watched it. And he looked at me and said, honey, that's what happened to you. And he had never said this to me. He was traumatized. That's what happened. She said, I'm going to do this. And he said, Suzanne doesn't want you to do that. Could you explain why you're going to do that? And she did it. And then she said, I'm going to do this. And Scott said, Suzanne doesn't want you to do that. Can you explain to me why we're going to do this? And she did it. And blah, blah, on and on and on. So that happened.
Yeah. My midwife, I delivered with a midwife at UCLA. She couldn't get privileges at Cedars-Sinai for 25 years. So it's much better now. They do have midwives. They have a really terrific chief. So things are much different. But I think a couple of things that you bring up are so key. And I just want to build off of what you were quoting me with Every Mother Counts. The thing that I had in mind in particular was the use of external fetal monitoring. And why we, and
it's
also—
the worst thing that ever happened to OB.
Mm-hmm. I am 100% with you. It's been called a public health failure.
It's horrible.
It's been called unethical. It's been called out, and it's like top of mind for me. So, we are on the same page there. There are no data, and you may know, I'm thinking of Grimes. I won't start citing
There's
studies,
data showing that it doesn't improve outcomes.
It doesn't improve outcomes, but it increases C-sections.
Of course it does.
And then doctors tend to be afraid of it because of the lawsuit issue.
Yes.
And if you have what is quote unquote in the vernacular a bad baby case, where you have a situation where you have something that went wrong in the birth, and it may very well, you need a placenta expert to come in because it may have nothing to do with your delivery. It may be like a genetic issue with your placenta, and we had a placenta, he came in and gave a lecture to us in medical school about the importance of that work and knowing that. So the point being that it's not always truth what happens in a court of law, but it can have a chilling effect on the way that medicine is practiced.
It can and it does, Julie. It has a huge, huge impact.
And I think that's a real issue, and that's a real shame. But to know that, for example, I had a midwife. I was at UCLA. I was informed as you were to the gills, and I still was they have to do what they call a 20-minute strip. And I was like, this is dumb. There are no data to support this. And she, and I was like, Debbie, this is ridiculous. And she was just kind of like, why don't we just do it and get it done? I'm like, but so that was, and I loved my caregiver, and I had a relationship, and I started seeing her before I was even thinking of getting pregnant because I wanted to try it out. I wanted this is not the right word. I was dating, but it's not the right word. It's gross, but I wanted to see, do we have a relationship? Are we, if I say the data on a pap smear are that I don't need one this year, is she gonna push back? How are we kind of gelling on that? So I wanted to have that relationship beforehand, but I think the system, and that's what I was talking about with the piece that Ivy saw, is that certainly, as you're talking about, that misogyny is baked in, all that, but when you have people going through a residency, for example, and it may not be everywhere, but just say, and you've never really seen a non-Pitocin birth, or you haven't spent 6 months with certified nurse midwives and kind of seen the different things. I'll just tell one quick story because my sister is a women's health physician specialist, and her husband is, I'm telling this for a reason because of the medical, her husband is a multi-fellowship trained interventional radiologist. So for their first baby, we read all the books, we had the conversations, we read the things from the Green Journal about the no data on, the intermittent monitoring better than the external fetal monitoring system. And she was laboring, she had a midwife who was the chair of midwifery, 30 years, amazing. My brother-in-law said she was one of the top 5 clinicians he'd ever encountered in all of his medical training. She had to leave the room to attend to another client for a few minutes, and she wanted to stay with my sister because although it was the end of her shift, she wanted to stay with my sister throughout to the end. So the medical team, residents, medical students, attending came in and said, we need to prep you for a C-section. And said, we're gonna go, we really need to move, let's do it. And the midwife came in and said, hold on. I'm gonna take it all down. Have you tried moving Amy to her left side? And they're no, we haven't, but we need to go. She's okay. Let's move, let's all help, because she's pregnant the whole day, so let's move Amy. Resolved. She said, thank you so much for coming in. We don't need you. We're gonna do this. If we need you, we'll call you. But we don't need you. Thank you. And my sister went on to deliver vaginally, but both she and her husband said, but for the midwife, my sister would have had 2 C-sections, no question. So, and there's nothing, let's be real for a second. C-sections are miraculous.
Yeah, of course.
They can be necessary. I know people who, I have a friend who's I want an epidural in the parking lot. I'm reading my magazine, and that is it. She did not want the whole situation. She's I'm bringing Vogue, and you can tell me when the baby's out, and that's it. Everybody needs to make a choice. The question is, and this is the thing, do you have the team that you need to make your choice? And that are you going to be listened to and heard? And I think your story is so instructive because you have that insight, and you said, I'm 32, 33, I'm walking.
Yeah,
I'm moving. You're not married to these people.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? You can move. And I've had in my class, I was telling Paula at the front, we study birth 2 weeks out of 13 in my class. From the legal, from the medical, the whole thing. And inevitably there's, there've been 4 or 5 pregnant women, and they always are moving. Because one of them, I remember she told me, I had this conversation with my clinician, and I said, here are the things that I'm concerned about, here's what I'm wanting. And the clinician said to her, if that's the kind of birth you want, maybe you want to go to a farm and squat in the field. Something along those lines. And so she said, we're not communicating well, and I need to be with somebody who's communicating better. So those are kind of the key things. But I think your story, your kind of take-home point about it's really hard and maybe not even possible to have some kind of big conversation during labor, that you need to be, if Debbie had said to me, we need to do a C-section, I would have been Debbie said.
Right.
But
but that's the thing.
I think it was so brave of you to be willing to change in the final hour. And so what do women need to know before that to really vet their provider, to know that we are on the same page? When so often it's the story changes in the 11th hour, and all of a sudden we're now 38 weeks, a couple weeks away from the due date, and all of a sudden it's well, you need to induce for this reason, that reason, or the other.
And that's what happened with Laura Pemberton. And she was with a provider, a clinician, an obstetrician who said, we're gonna do a VBAC, we're gonna do a trial, to trial of labor. And then at week 36, he was like, no, we're not. And it might have been questions about liability. It was unclear what the change was, but there was a change. And then she kind of had to scramble for a care provider, found a lay midwife who would work with her, and it kind of rolled out from there into ended up being a forced C-section where they had a court order to retrieve her from her home and bring her into the hospital by ambulance strapped down. And what? Based on she.
Oh, that's one of the states.
She needed.
No,
it wasn't even that. It was just like the doctor said she needed a C-section and she was refusing, and we have to save the baby. But I think the key is to get your care team ahead of time. And on the blog post actually at Needed, we posted a number of books that I think are really instructive about kind of bringing you up to speed. Hensi Goer has a really good book where she's going through the medical literature and saying, and she has in the front, she says, people said I couldn't write this book because I'm not a doctor. And she said, well, I know how to read. So she was like, we can read the studies and come up with exactly what Dr. Suzanne is saying about, fetal monitoring, and then saying, well, what are you trained in, a different kind of method of monitoring the fetus. So really understanding some of these dilemmas and the way physicians in this country are trained versus, for example, the way they do birth in the UK, where the midwives really are the primary caregivers. And then it's like, well, if you need extra level of care, then you kind of are referred out.
It's a very standardized system. Part of the problem that starts happening in that area for people here is that they don't really understand the differences in training and levels of training. They don't understand the differences in experience. They don't understand really what the risks are and are not. And it's complicated. I will say you did it really right at the last minute, to be perfectly honest, because it can be very hard to make a change like that. A lot of you're going to come to me at 36 weeks. Peace out. Nope, I'm not accepting you. I don't take vacations that I didn't know already. Anyways. But, a lot of people would just be like, no. So it's going to be hard to find somebody.
Why would they say that, though, just out of curiosity?
Some of it is, there's a cultural thing. Some of it is that you haven't had, maybe you're already full up, maybe your roster is full. Some of it is that you're like, what's going on there? There's
something like a red flag, yeah.
Which is fair, not fair. But again, let's not forget, we're taking on, here's the
deal.
You
have free will to take people on.
100%. And I'm the one who's getting sued if something goes wrong. Right. I don't know you. You show up with 3 weeks left in your pregnancy. Maybe you're the most awesome person in the world. Super cool. Got it together. Need to make a venue change. Maybe you're a crazy cuckoo puff. And anything I do is going to be wrong. And it's super hard. My job's really hard, even when it's great. So,
that's why it's important to ask the right questions earlier in the game. But I still,
I want to say, last thing I want to say is that the truth is, there's this thing called the internet. The information is out there. It is out there about us. People have.
Are you suggesting people get their medical information?
No, they should vet their provider.
What are people saying?
They should vet their providers.
Yes, absolutely.
And is it fair? No, I don't think it's fair. I think that there should be a society where you can show up and there's a standard of care and you can be listened to. Yes, that's what I think. But let me introduce you to reality here at this moment in this country, in this city. Okay, that's not. So you have to be really informed consumer. You need to, and if you're like, I'm a lawyer working 120 hours a week, of course, I don't know how you have the time to go read a stack of books. I'm with you. But at least, I can give you a couple of articles if you really want the short, but you have to be a savvy consumer. You have to be informed. I think you really need to understand these differences. And even, I think you make such a great point. You're the person who has to do the research. Ultimately, it's your body, it's your decision. This is not going to be a handheld kind of thing. Does that suck? Yeah, I think it kind of does. Because what you do not want, like you were saying, and I think your story is so illustrative, and yours too, is you get that bad gut feeling, or you have that experience 12 years later where you're watching the film of that was the nidus of my trauma because I wasn't listened to because you got on the wrong train. So if you got on a train to Paris and you thought you were going to New York, do not be surprised when you end up in Paris. So you have to understand what train you're getting on, and is it, like I said, is it fair? Should you have to be this ultra-informed consumer? No, of course not. But unless you go to maybe the UK or you go to Amsterdam or you go somewhere else entirely, I think in this country at this moment, you have to be really vigilant. Now, there are some places that are doing a laborist model. UC Davis has a laborist model where they have.
I have mixed feelings about that.
Okay, well that's fair, but there's
laborist meaning like it's a rotation and you don't know who you're going to get.
They have.
That doesn't necessarily make it better.
It may not, but they have the CNMs are the primary care providers, and then they have another, OB on staff who focuses on that. Is it maybe about? I don't know. I don't have an answer for the best system.
I think it depends on who
Well,
the
it also
person is.
depends on the policy of the institution, because in that case, a lot of it you're just kind of subject to whatever policies are in place at that particular
And you can read, if you like Naomi Wolf's writing, you can read her book. You can read Suzanne Arms' book about the culture of obstetrics and what residency is like. It's a bit traumatizing for people. It's a bit toxic. There are a number of books. Jennifer Block, who just came out with a book that I haven't read about women's health, has a book about birth, really instructive. We read it in my course. There are books out there, so you're not going to be like, whoa, this is all new to me. There's a whole section in the library about this stuff. And then to find a care provider, and this is, for example, my sister-in-law, where she is in Santa Barbara and had an obstetrician, and the obstetrician was like, I want you to get this doula. She's great. You don't need me, to manage. You're going to be great. It's going to be fine. She's like, I read the books. I know. So she found somebody who was really kind of open to the issues that we've been talking about with the system, these systemic issues, and she felt like that was a good fit for her. And so the question is really, what do you need to know? What is the right fit for you? And like I said, if you're my friend who's like, oh, I don't care, you can schedule this. Yeah, we want to induce, fine, schedule the C-section, good. I don't care, you want to play golf, whatever it is, not a problem.
One thing
But you have to find your fit.
And that's also an issue of education. If someone's saying, oh, let's schedule a C-section, do they know all the possible health consequences of that? Do they know what the actual risks are? And I think that
especially if you're thinking of having 2 or 3 or 4 kids.
100 years ago, people had some contact with birth. It would have been weird. First of all, most people, I was looking at the stats on US mortality rates, maternal mortality rates, and all this really interesting history I didn't know about this country. And I knew that most people were born at home until a certain time. Now that wasn't necessarily better, by the way. We had extraordinarily high infant and maternal mortality rates in the early part of the 1900s, hideous. Partly because people were just willy-nilly, weren't trained, faced sepsis,
dirty.
It was gross, and also it was also because of misogyny. It was not an okay, it wasn't a cool thing to do to be an attendant at birth. In the 30s, there was this commission. They cleaned it up, and actually, everything got way better, within 10 years. Now, almost everybody started having babies in the hospital. So this was the beginning of the medicalization. It actually was for the benefit, because maternal mortality rates plummeted. They plummeted. But exactly, I'm not doing and then they didn't get any better, and then we have, all this, we're not even going to get into the whole, racism thing, and, why, that's a whole other panel, but that's so crazy.
Well, then the electronic fetal monitoring comes in
that's
with no data,
right.
and then the C-section rates.
Because if you have a shitty strip and you don't, I'm going to tell you,
sued.
That's right. Yeah. And you are going to get sued.
Yeah.
You are going to get sued.
Yeah.
So, and I'm going to tell you, this is a little thing that people say. Nobody ever got sued for a bad strip and a C-section.
Right.
Right? Nobody got sued for the section that you did.
You got
for the bad strip. Depending on where you're having the C-section, and I'm going to tell you, I don't know if anybody here, it was Michel Audent. He's amazing. And I heard him say this, and I really appreciate it. He's a French physician who really has promoted physiologic birth, undisturbed birth.
And he's in Ricky Lake's film.
Yeah, he is. Yes.
You want to see that?
Yes. So I think when we start overstating I'm not saying that a C-section isn't a surgery and it's not dangerous, but really I think fear-mongering about C-sections is really not a great plan of action. Because first of all, C-sections at this point in this country are by and large safe. Now that doesn't mean that you don't have higher rates of complications, but you have to remember that somebody labored and then had a C-section, there's already stuff going on. So,
but how many of those complications are from the intervention?
You can never know. You can never know. That's the problem.
Well, the statistics show that, because one of the things I wanted to say that came up in my conversation with Paula was the statistics about the farm, which was a birth center in Tennessee from a pretty famous midwife, Ina Mae Gaskin,
Who was completely self-trained.
and
They all were.
in
Mhm.
thousands,
She trained them.
in thousands of births, there were zero maternal
Well,
deaths.
there were, but it's complicated.
Very
They were
selective.
very healthy.
Yeah.
They were very healthy women. They were very young. Interestingly, what you talking about normal birth is they basically all became midwives as a counterculture thing. They were hippies. They got on buses from Berkeley and they were like, F the system, basically.
Well,
because it was
I never
Twilight.
talks about it.
Twilight.
People started getting pregnant, traveling all over the
And
country.
so
having
they
sex,
started reading
and then they were like,
books.
shit, what are we going to do? This is literally what happened.
No, I know. I went there. I spoke
It's
to them
amazing. No, I know.
all. But
Yeah.
like all the midwife, they trained themselves from a book they bought of Mexican midwifery, and they trained themselves. They were art majors. They were law majors. They did it. They delivered all their children safely. They believed in holistic education. They then actually went on to do some of the biggest legalizations and educations of midwives in this country, full stop, and making it a legitimate practice again. But one of the most interesting things is that they deliver the Amish. And it sounds really weird that these dope-smoking hippies, the biggest amount of kids they deliver is the Amish. But they go out to the Amish because the Amish is the nearest community to them. And when they first moved, the local OB was like, I will give you proper training, but only if you help me deliver all these Amish babies, because there's billions of them. They've delivered a woman's 19th baby at 49 years old. They aren't necessarily low-risk pregnancies, but those women have seen birth since they could open their eyes. Those girls grew up around birth. There's no fear of birth. It's just a normal, holistic thing. And so I think there's way too many C-sections in this country. Full stop. That no one can debate with that, and that does affect the maternal mortality rate.
The World Health Organization recommends 10%. Increased rates of cesarean is correlated with increased rates of maternal.
No, but what I was saying is that I think it's hard to compare the communities that have very successful births, for example, because it's not just about that day, as you said, it's about a whole lifetime of a lack of fear, of support of the community, of understanding this is normal. I think everyone here will agree that a huge part of birth is psychological, and letting go, and being able to let your body just do what it needs to do. And if that means you need to jump around the stream, or I just hummed and asked everyone if they wanted tea, like whatever it is that you need to do, you do you.
I
And
would come just to hang out.
oh,
I want very much time. Sorry.
Your tea won't even stew yet, but I think that, to me, is the key, is to try and take away the fear. As much as this conversation about informed consent is about, yes, these scary things can happen. Yes, America has lots of issues right now. Yes, there's lots of scary legal things. The best thing you can do for yourself is have confidence in yourself as a woman.
There's physiology to that. So you've got the science here, you guys, is when you're in fight or flight, you are not going to be releasing oxytocin, because your body knows if you are being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, it is no time to drop a baby. For reals, that's what your body is feeling. That's what's going on. So that means when you walk into whatever environment you're going to walk into, if you're like this and you don't feel seen, heard, supported, which is why it's so important to have a good doula, I think, if that's available and an opportunity, because it can be super expensive too, that can help take the burden off. Better if you can have the relationship, the education. I think you need to know who you are. That's a lot of work, by the way. But I think if you know who you are, if you're getting a weird feeling, my boyfriend calls it his belly button, or his name is Gregory Allen, but he calls it Gregory Allen. Gregory Allen tells him stuff all the time.
It's like a spidey, it's
It's his spidey sense, and
yeah.
it's true. And it's like, if you feel that, that's not, you're not being crazy. That's real. So maybe if you can't even put your finger on it, we as women are taught not to honor our instincts, and we have the greatest instincts on the planet. We freaking grow a thing and push it out of our body. Why? That's amazing. And then feed it. Thank you.
So
when
but I think
you
need to have
needed.
some sense of yourself.
Exactly right, and to listen to your gut, because that's that combination of your intuition and your knowledge. And as you know, we talked about knowledge is power. I know it's a cliche, but it's actually really true in this situation.
So we're going to open it up for Q&A, but I just want to say I always encourage clients, if that's when you get that spidey sense and you know you're getting pressured in a way you don't like, it's not too late to change. I've had clients transfer care at 37 weeks to both doctors and midwives, and they were so glad they did. So
one last thing that I wanted to say is I think partners feel very weird in the whole scenario because they feel very useless, especially once you get into the labor room or everything's going on. So I think the best thing you can do as a woman is know yourself, know your choices, but then have like a really honest talk with your partner and have them take notes. Your partner is the person who knows you best. Your partner is the person who's going to be in that room and be the best advocate for you, because as much as your doula is there and she's going to make you feel calm and safe and secure, your partner is the person who can stand in front of that provider and say no, or why is this happening? Because doulas don't have any legal standing.
yeah, we legally can't do that.
To be able to do that. So I think it's really important for partners also to feel like they have a voice in that room. As much as we're saying that women have a voice, I think it's really important to discuss with your partner what they need to do for you to help you feel safe. And also so they don't feel useless. My husband was largely useless. He DJ'd Hawaiian lullaby music in the corner because that's all I wanted him to do. I was like, stay away from me and do not talk to me. And my doula was very present. But that was the chat we had. And if it had ended up in a hospital or a C-section, he knew that I wanted certain things. He knew that I wanted skin to skin. He knew I wanted delayed cord clamping. There's all sorts of small things. And go the whole remit. Go your ideal birth scenario and go the worst case birth scenario and discuss all of those things. Because in the moment, the only person who can advocate for you probably is your partner. And I think that's a really part of the conversation that gets missed a lot because we talk only to the mother when it's a family thing, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I find as a doula, so many dads do want to have that conversation. They just don't know where to start. So with that, we would love if anybody has questions for our panel.
I am a labor and delivery nurse. I'm also now currently practicing as a labor nurse and birth coach or doula. And I think that particularly with the partner, of course, like the partner is the person who is of sane mind. They may be a little overwhelmed by the scenario, but at the same time, like, yes, they know her the best. They know what she wants, but I feel like that's a lot of pressure. And even now functioning in the doula role, it's like, for the partner to know exactly what's going on and understanding the medical side versus like her preference side, being able to advocate for her is a lot of pressure. Now as a doula, like I'm navigating, like I'm a nurse, but I'm considered a doula, and like I'm not supposed to have any medical say in anything when like I'm board certified in obstetrics. Like, so that's awkward for me too. And where I feel like I would like to bring attention to is the role of the labor and delivery nurse.
Oh, thank you so much.
Because she is there, mostly she is there at the bedside watching this patient one-on-one for 12 hours and then 12 hours. They are there, the doctor's not in-house, they're the ones communicating with the doctor. When I trained nurses, I would literally role play with them and be like, okay, so you're gonna call this doctor, and what are you gonna say? Well, her water broke, she's not contracting. That's different than her water broke, she's contracting this often. Her preference is to walk around for 2 hours, wait and see before you end up having a Pitocin conversation. The way the nurse formulated that circumstance is going to make a difference in the outcome of what happens with that patient.
100%.
The other thing for advocacy, that like, it's so much pressure on the partner to be able to say, like, you're suggesting a C-section, they're telling them that your baby's gonna die if you don't have the C-section. Well, of course, I'm going to go for the C-section, right? When the nurse is looking at the tracing, or even currently myself looking at the fetal heart rate monitor and going, I'm seeing what I need to see to know this baby does not have metabolic acidosis, or there's really like maybe concern, but not like a full, like, let's have a conversation first, right? I'm not currently saying that because I'm navigating a very awkward dynamic. But if the nurse, who is the actual labor and delivery nurse, has questions, I am pointing to her because she is one, by the way. She's like wanting to stay anonymous. But the nurse is at the bedside and saying, like, I I disagree potentially with the management. Your nurse is there to advocate for you. That is one of our roles. That's what we're trained in. And we know our doctors really well. We know the way they practice. We know what their preferences are. And we also are learning this patient the best we can, building rapport very quickly with them. And so I think for all of us, like whatever your role is, to not forget the nurse, that your nurse, like build a relationship with her, be best friends with her, and she's gonna bend over backwards for you potentially. The other thing all of that being said, that's my little rant. Now, my question for you guys is, as a birth worker in whatever role, whether that be nurse or doula or just a support person or whatever that is, what if the patient doesn't change providers? And do you have any strategies for the patient receiving informed consent? And I would say, like, I'm looking around for bellies, like birth worker, maybe, like doulas in the room, because there is that awkward dynamic of not wanting to stand up to the doctor for the patient, or whatever, that if there's a scenario where the patient is not receiving informed consent, how do you suggest us going about that to receive the informed consent without pissing off the doctor and, not overstepping, but helping the client advocate for themselves in that scenario and really make the best decision for themselves?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for bringing the nurse role into this, because that's something that I say to clients all the time, is that your doctor will most likely, in terms of the actual delivery, be there for pushing, and sometimes not all of
I
pushing.
tell them, if you saw me that many times, that's not a good sign.
Yeah.
You were there a really long time.
So oftentimes, the average first labor is anywhere from 12 to 24 hours. Pushing might be 2 hours. The longest pushing I've ever seen was 6 hours, and the doctor only came for 2 hours of that. So, it's not a lot of actual presence of the attending physician at the birth. It is the labor and delivery.
And just a footnote there, that's another thing that would be, I think, fair to say as a clinical difference with the way that certified nurse midwives practice, is that they're labor sitting. So they are with you managing your labor. They are there for hours and hours and hours.
Relationship the whole way through.
And, I remember saying to Saraswati Vedam, to bring her up again, I said something like, well, I have this impression, I was a second or third year medical student, I was like, well, things go bad really quickly. And she's like, not really, not if you're there for the whole labor. She's like, I can tell you what's going to happen. It's not quite as emergent when you were there. Just from her perspective. Or if you're in touch, yeah, exactly.
Which, just so you guys know, a responsible physician is not there the whole time. No way. There are some that famous for falling asleep on the couch. That situation. But
but then it gets back to well, how not to be on a tangent, because I want to have this question answered. But then, what kind of monitoring are y'all doing?
Oh, well, we're using fetal monitor.
Right.
We're looking at mom. We're looking at her vital signs. We're talking to them. So here's the thing. I'm super lucky because these two amazing ladies, I get to work with, and it is a long-term relationship. So listen, if one of these guys calls me, I know their process too. Yeah. So I know what I'm dealing with. Everybody doesn't get that wonderful care. Everybody doesn't have a labor and delivery nurse like that, unfortunately.
Very true.
Sometimes there's hostility and there's some weird shit going down.
Absolutely.
I'll tell you that I think, even though everybody wants to be friends and everyone wants to be nice, you probably are gonna, if you feel like you have to advocate, what I've seen done, which pisses doctors off, but I don't know what you're gonna do, I think you just have to do what you think is the right thing, is to address your client and say, ask them, do you understand what's going on? Do you understand what's being offered? Do you understand what the options are? Do you understand the risk benefits of alternatives? And is there a doctor who's gonna be like, oh, wait a second, maybe I shouldn't say that? Yeah, there's probably that doctor. But most of them are going to be like, and and that's kind of I'm just being honest. And by the way, people don't give up $250,000 in education and their whole lives because they hate people. they love OB and they love humans, but they're just locked sometimes into their perspective. Correct. But I think that, I don't know, maybe you guys have something better to say, but I'm not sure what else to say.
You have the right to refuse care.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You have the right to refuse care, and you could have people who are going to say to you, well, you're going to deliver a dead baby. That is a really, I would feel like I wish that, we were all on the same team and the same page long ago and had those relationships. But certainly there are those cases where that's kind of, that is the conversation that you're having, and ultimately it puts the laboring woman. I mean, your partner, whether whoever that is, it doesn't have power of attorney all of a sudden. Like, you're still the decision maker. And you can remind yourself, and quite frankly, I just want to say that my midwife, and again, this is me, because I was in labor. The other thing, I recommend staying home as long as possible.
Yes.
Do not go in. And I had, when I was teaching my class at Yale, I had one of my great obstetrician friends come in, and he would say, "You do not want to come in. I'm going to do things because that's my training." So anyway, long story short, stay home as long as possible. So I came in, and I remember. So my labor and delivery nurse was a little different because I refused care right off the bat. I was like, I do not want an IV. I do not want this. And it was a little like we were not communicating well right off the bat. But so Debbie, my midwife, said to me, "You have the right to refuse care." And I'm a lawyer, you know what I mean? And I went to medical, but in the moment, I'm 9 centimeters dilated, very vulnerable. Like, I don't know
You're scared, and you don't know what's going on.
But just to have somebody remind you, you have the power. You are empowered. Have somebody remind you, you have the right to refuse care. Now, they may, that may lead to a huge conflict. Somebody may get the ethics for whatever it is, but you don't give up your power because you're delivering a baby.
Even in emergency situations.
You haven't you haven't lost your ability to consent. So you need to, I highly recommend having that relationship with your caregiver, where you have a Dr. Suzanne and you're like, I trust you implicitly, and what you recommend, like, we have had this. That's the best case scenario. But if you don't, and you're having a conflict, I really implore you to remember that you do have that right to refuse care, or you have a right to demand more information, or you have a right to get another opinion and and maybe the nurse can help you with that and say, I'm going to get Dr. So-and-so to come in, or maybe there's a chief resident who's like amazing, who can talk everybody down, or a third-year resident, or somebody who's got that knowledge base, who you're like, you know what, let's get Dr. So-and-so, she's amazing or he's amazing, and we're gonna mediate this. We're gonna get to the other side. And that's a great role.
What I always suggest is for clients to just ask the question, is it a medical emergency now? And if the answer is no, okay, we'd like to have some time. And sometimes just having that time to kind of sidebar without the pressure in the room. And 9 times out of 10, actually I would say 99.99999% of the time, it's not in a medical emergency now, because if it were a medical emergency now, there would be a whole different constellation of things happening. So just that question of, is it a medical emergency now, sometimes allows the space for that fear to come down and the choice to be more of an authentic one for the parents. And I also just wanted to say about your experience as a nurse and the way that you work with doctors. In my experience at hospitals all over the city, it's often the case that it's more of a top-down thing, and the pressure on the nurses is to conform to whatever the policy is, whatever the doctor is dictating. That nurse's hands are tied, and oftentimes the nurses are so stressed out and so spread so thin that they're really not able to be that kind of advocate. So I love working with you guys, and I love seeing nurses who are able to have that kind of relationship with the doctors, but I also just feel a responsibility to let parents know that oftentimes it's not so amicable with the nurses, and if you need to request a different nurse, you can also request a different nurse in that situation.
And somebody who's has your experience, or has, talking to people who are part of the culture here, to say, like, to get to download with them, or to get recommendations, that can also be a great source of information if you can access it.
I just kind of wanted to say, I'm not a birth worker, and I love that you mentioned the Bradley book, because for whatever reason, like, my husband and I really zoned in on that, and there's this very interesting thing in it that I always think about when we're having this conversation. He has this thing that he calls the emotional signposts, that basically what is the emotional state of a woman in the process of labor. And I always think it's so confounding, or just terrible timing, that a lot of times the moment when a woman is biologically the most unsure of herself is also the moment when most of these decisions happen to be made, or happen to have to be made. And I think that they were calling my husband Daddy Doula because he's a little crazy. But if you have a partner who doesn't want to be involved as much, or if you're a doula and your hands are a little bit tight about what you can advise and what you can't advise, just like bolstering mom's confidence in her ability to make a decision, in my experience, was so incredibly helpful. Because my state was very foggy and very unsure, but to have somebody it was my doula, had me okay, here's what you need to, you got this, and this is maybe what you need to think about or what you need to ask her. She just reminded me that I have the power to make my own choice. And I think that's a really simple thing that hopefully doesn't step on anybody's toes or create this feeling in a room that's not going to be productive. And it's a simple thing that I think that often we forget, that it's not just the system or it's not just the providers, it's literally the biological experience from an emotional standpoint.
Well, and it's also are you in an environment, are you in a birthing environment that you're able to coincide with that kind of intuition? And I think a lot of people don't understand how important that is and what kind of environment would be conducive to that.
And I was going to say, I think that probably everyone in this room has that level of privilege where the choices that we are making or able to make and able to demand and ask for are not the choices many women in this country get to make. I have traveled around America and I have talked to people, particularly in rural America, where they are 90 miles from the nearest hospital. And there is one doctor and then that doctor doesn't like them for whatever reason, whatever prejudice they have. Unfortunately, they have to deal with it. So
you can go about 10 miles that way.
Right.
People over here, we are some lucky people.
Right.
And so one of the things I would like people to leave here with is how do we create these opportunities for people who are not,
and it's
do not
our
have this privilege.
responsibility.
Absolutely.
Because we're consumers, so we drive the change, and it's unfortunately the way the consumers drive the change is the ones who have choices consumers. So if we're making better choices, not just for ourselves, it's going to trickle down.
I heard what you were saying about the one doctor, and I think that's really illustrative. I'm wondering if you could give one example of what you're saying. I've never been
people
on
who
wards
are
there.
coming. I mean, there's nothing wrong with labor and delivery at California Hospital, but what I'm saying is that these women are by and large quite poor. Some of them have emergency Medi-Cal, so they can get coverage because they're pregnant. Some of them roll into the emergency room, without any care. Especially now, I haven't been working over there for 20 years, but now with the really real threat toward immigrants, people are afraid to get care. They're not coming in, which means they're going to come in a lot with potentially more medical issues. There's fear, which is not unwarranted, or you could just be any person of color and come in off the street. Women of color, despite socioeconomic status, have very different rates, much higher rates of maternal mortality and mortality complications. So we all know that you can come into the most fancy hospital and be the most fancy person and have people not listen to you. And also you're walking into the room because you've been walking around your life knowing that people are
There's a prejudice.
right, looking at you, which is stressful. So I obviously can only speak from my own experience as a provider and for people telling me I'm obviously a white person, but
we're going to do a whole panel
And
on
we're working on
healthcare
planning that
disparities.
it needs to happen.
Yeah.
But I think that's important for us all to remember that it's really nice for us to do that choice, but unfortunately it doesn't happen.
Absolutely, and I would also like to just bring into this in closing that I do feel that it is a basic human right to have access to these choices, and that if we zoom out worldwide and throughout the course of history, women did have this kind of support. Just last week I was in a training with a midwife from South America, Natalie Benaver, and we were learning these techniques of a rebozo, which is a shawl that they could actually use to do serious interventions like turning a breech baby, where here in the United States now, the only option you have if you want to deliver in a hospital is a cesarean. In many cases, there's most doctors, there's maybe 2 doctors in all of Los Angeles that are doing vaginal breech births now, and 1 doctor that will do it at home. And he's leaving town, so there's no more home birth options for breech birth. And we don't have access to that, but they do in certain parts of Mexico, in certain parts of Brazil. So while it is true that the poorest of the poor here in the United States are at a huge disadvantage, there are places in other parts of the world that are poorer, that have far superior maternity care.
Look, there are a lot of different forces, pressures going on, and I think certainly, as I mentioned, the legal system and suing people and looking at the strip and, $50 million verdicts, like those things aren't particularly helpful if you're practicing obstetrics. Like if I saw that in the local paper, I think I might be really stressed out. So we have a lot of work to do, and I think that I think the thing to remember, and Brian actually had the best quote about this, and I'm gonna mangle it, so maybe if you're remembering, you were saying like it's not,
The people are good, the curriculum's flawed.
yeah, the people are good, the curriculum's flawed. So the people are good, the system has some issues. But it really is not like an indictment of individuals or even an indictment of entire professions or anything like that. It's just kind of, how did we get here? And you can look historically, and it's just trying to navigate that, being aware that there is some navigation needed, and trying to get like a captain of your birth team and the skipper and, get everybody on your birth team who can like navigate you in the direction that you want to go. And I think remembering to hold your power and to keep that power and to keep your superhero spidey sense and know that that power is with you.
Yeah. So we've had an incredible conversation. We have a really wonderful midwife in attendance, and we haven't heard two midwives. So I'd love to hear what you had to say, Flip.
I just wanted to wrap licensed midwives and home birth into the conversation, and if we're talking about informed consent, I feel really lucky because there are laws. I'm licensed by the medical board, so I have a license and I have laws that I have to abide by. But when it comes to decision-making process, it really is me and the client, the family, And so I had a couple of examples that I was thinking about in this conversation that I have the ability to be able to be really autonomous in respecting a family's desire, and sorry, this conversation, I'm like crawling out of my skin. It is so big, but one of them, they had a baby. They made the decision to not have any ultrasounds in their pregnancy, and they had a baby at home that was born without any kidneys. This baby was not going to survive, and when she looked back at her decision, she feels really satisfied and feels protected in her spiritual desire that she really wanted that baby to be here and to have that experience. And she thinks if she had had an ultrasound, she may not have had that experience. She had a second baby at home, beautiful rainbow baby. They've chosen me to be their provider this time. And she doesn't want me to listen with a fetoscope. So that's what we use instead of the monitors at the hospital. And when she first said it, I was like, wait a minute, this is different than how I normally provide care. I always listen prenatally with a Doppler instead of a fetoscope. And she's like, when we can hear the baby on the fetoscope, then we'll hear the baby. And I was like, I had to adjust because this is her desire. This is her birth. She's well informed. She's had a loss. She knows what that's like. So for me to step in and be like, well, standard of care, it's just like it made me a little uncomfortable, and I have to adjust how I normally practice. But for me, that is our job. Our job is to get true informed consent and let them make their own decisions, And then I had someone recently who, she was in transition and she did not, I gave her true informed consent, as you were mentioning, like we have to do this prenatally about GBS and the standard of care is to give antibiotics in labor, and I was there preparing it for her. We had conversations, they knew exactly, and I went to give it to her when I needed to give it to her then or it wasn't going to happen, and they declined. They knew what their risks were, and so that would be very difficult to do in the hospital. And I have also worked to support people in a hospital environment, and I tell them it's going to be really hard to decline antibiotics in the hospital. So there, I appreciate this conversation so much, and I think that it is a huge readjustment of insurance and liability and teaching and all of that. But I do think as providers, I really, down to my core, believe that as providers, we really have to manage our own fear and really give true informed consent and say, like, this, if I'm going to be in this career, I have to understand that there's a risk to it, and I want to come to the table and really give people. I just wanted to wrap that in.
Thank you. Thank you to our wonderful panelists. Thank you so much to all of you for joining in the conversation.